So I know Denzyl through Platoon, first and foremost, through a mutual friend called Kwame Kwarteng. I had an artist with Platoon in some Platoon's very early days called George Ogilvy. And Denzyl also threw away Ian, was it Matthew Barzan, who is the
US ambassador?
Yeah, the US ambassador. You threw a gig towards George, which we went to Matthew's leaving do, which was a very, very entertaining evening, where Alistair Campbell played the bagpipes, and we turned up late. Well, no, we didn't. We turned up on time, but we were told as we arrived that, what cover have you learned? And we were like, we had to learn a cover? No one told us we had to learn a cover. So very quickly, we found out the parameters were also... This was just after 2016, which, of course, was the unfortunate year where a lot of famous musicians died. And you had to learn a cover from someone who died in 2016, who was either British or American, to do with of course, the relationship between America and Britain that Matthew had. So I turned to George and said, well, you've got to learn Purple Rain. He was the latest. And he was the latest on the evening. He was effectively headlining it. But at this point, everyone had a lot of free drinks and stuff. And, myself, Kwame, and, amongst others, were sort of stood around, and there was like David Hay, there was Brian Cox, there was everyone singing along to Purple Rain. It was quite a surreal experience. Is it a palace? It's not a palace. It's just the ambassador's home is very nice in Regent's Park.
We miss. I think it's called Winfield House. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Really miss Matthew. He was a wonderful ambassador.
Yeah, he's a good guy
and a great music lover. He had so many events there.
Well, he gave us all a vinyl. An LP, with it was Bell and Sebastian and the National, I think. It was all recordings that were done
recorded live.
Yeah, that was a great night.
Yeah, good. How is George?
Yeah, he's he's had his album out now. It was all recorded at Real World Studios and bits and bobs. He's we did our deal with Believe, which we're now out of. We're looking on to album number 2 now. But obviously, I think we're going to make a point of trying to not talk about COVID-19 throughout this, because we're all, I'm sure we're all sick to death talking about it. But yeah, we had a tour, we had gigs in the diary, to support the album, which of course have all gone. But no, it's done all right, and he's good. Thanks for asking.
Extremely talented young kid.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, I think it's probably time to do a bit of a kick-off. So if I could get the three of you to introduce yourselves, I'm just going to get out of the way. We're officially recording now, and just as if everyone can keep their cameras and microphones off for better bandwidth, I think we all know the Zoom etiquette by now. So let's get on with it. Ben.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ben Bushell. I'm the course leader for music management at the University of West London, amongst being an artist manager in the wider music business.
Hi, I'm Tony Rigg. I set up the MA Music Industry Management course at UCLan in the north of England, and I work as a consultant and have a portfolio of music-related activities. And recently, we've been writing books as well. We had one come out last month called The Future of Live Music, which was largely pre-COVID. Written pre-COVID. Unfortunately, we didn't predict a global pandemic. However, the book is still extremely relevant and highly recommended. So that's a little bit about me. And actually, perhaps I could kick off slightly, because I was thinking about Denzyl. I was looking at Denzyl's career, and very often, I don't know if you've seen these sort of sci-fi films or programs, and things like The Highlander or Doctor Who, and they have often you'll find a character in a photograph who's present at lots of disasters in time, and I was sort of reflecting on the places that Denzyl has been, and you could kind of find his picture in all of the places where the industry was experiencing challenges. And he's going to be, he's one of those faces who's there at the forefront, leading the industry into, a better place, and doing remarkable work. Though, as far as I'm aware, Denzyl doesn't have a time machine, as far as I know, but clearly he has great vision. And he's somebody with vast experience in the many dimensions of the modern music industry. So we're going to be talking about largely the themes relating to the industrial and financial mechanisms of popular music, but trying to get the benefit of Denzyl's experience looking at the present and future of music. But could I perhaps start by asking Denzyl just to fill some of the gaps that I've created with this, this idea of him being in these critical places and shaping the industry over the last few decades?
Sure. Well, I have a belief that things go in 7-year cycles. Now, that's been true for my life. It's probably true in some way for many people's lives if you do the math. So, I grew up in South Africa under the apartheid regime. I was lucky to be exposed to music through my older brother, who was 9 years older than me. He was a jazz trumpeter and also a liberal politician. So I was kicked out of high school for politics. I did 1 year in the South African Army and then left. So in 1972, I left. And I ended up in New Mexico State, where I studied music and music therapy and things like that. And I was a bass player. So I was a musician first. And then came back to South Africa in 82 because I hadn't been back for 10 years and got stuck into the South African music industry and started managing artists and playing with, I didn't mean to stay there. I just got stuck there for family reasons. And during that time, I met Paul Simon. Well, I got a call from Paul Simon, who was, somebody had given him a cassette tape called Zulu Jive Hits Volume 3. And he was looking for the artists on that. And somehow through Warner Brothers, his call came to us. So that led me on a 7-year adventure working with Paul Simon, doing everything on Graceland from beginning to end, doing the Graceland tour. Paul set me up in management in the Brill Building in New York, and I got to manage all the artists from Graceland, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, and Hugh Masekela, Marie Makiba, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also was managing Johnny Clegg at the time. And then, kick forward, moved to LA. I was a manager all through the 80s and 90s. I had an experience in the early 90s managing an artist on a major label, and he wanted to make a children's album, and they wouldn't let him. An artist named Kenny Loggins, who was 25 years on Columbia doing pop records, and they said on page 342 of your contract it says you have to do pop albums, and I just wouldn't take no for an answer, and we eventually made the album on our own. It was called Return to Per Corner, and sold 3 million cassettes and CDs overnight, all on our own, completely independently. And if that was 92, 93, that stuck in my head until 97, when I stopped managing. I actually bought a flower farm in Hawaii, just on a whim, just to do something different, and realized the internet was suddenly bubbling in 97. So I built a website, an HTML website where I could sell my flowers. And I thought, well, wait a minute, if the music industry, unless you have a record deal, there's no way to get your music out. But this thing called the internet so I built something called AWAL, Artist Without a Label, which, as you know, is now, and I built that up for 18 years and sold it to Cobalt about 8 years ago. And, again, right place, right time, 2000 and end of 2001, 2002, somebody knocked on my door, probably in another 7-year cycle. Hi, my name's Bill. I work for this man named Steve Jobs. We really need some help. So that led me on another adventure, working with Steve, the late great Steve Jobs. And because I had AWOL, I was trying to do digital downloading. Obviously, I was a shoe-in for helping build iTunes, which I did in 2003. They sent me to London in 2004 to launch iTunes for Europe, and I stayed as an advisor to Apple for the last 18 years until December 7th, 2018. So in 2016, I saw yet another moment in time where artists, they weren't ready for a major label. They weren't ready for an aggregator like my old company, AWOL or TuneCore or Ditto or DistroKid or anything like that. They were happy to stay on SoundCloud. 2016, SoundCloud was a real community, and people could grow their fans and their audience and get this reaction. And so they were happy to build their audience in SoundCloud. And I thought at the time there was an opportunity. So I started something called Platoon. That was a distribution at its heart, but really wanting to build services and have a team and give artists support and things like that. And again, as serendipity would have it, our first artists were Georgia Smith, George Ogilvy, a young girl who was 14 at the time named Billie Eilish, Yeba, Stefflon Don, Mr. Easy. During that time, I went back to South Africa. I started an office in Cape Town. We started building an African roster, and things grew quite quickly. I was an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I should just let this group know that, that's been my I've never really had a job ever. So I was good at, building companies. I failed at many of them. And so we raised money for Platoon, and then it was time to raise another round, and I wrote a letter, and before I knew it, Apple acquired Platoon in December 7th of 2018, and which was 7 years to the date on December 7th that Cobalt acquired AWOL. I'm just saying. And here we are. So I try to condense all the gaps for you in and I know I've left lots out, but hopefully we'll cover that.
Your activities have punctuated key events in music. The creation of iTunes being such a critical point. In terms of a revolution in monetizing and consumption patterns. But can I ask you, the creation of iTunes, what were the biggest challenges? One thought is illegal downloading was rife at the time. How did you combat that? What was happening there?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I remember at the time, the challenges were labels too. Obviously people were quite addicted to the fact that CDs were quite profitable. Mm-hmm. And Steve, really wanted to break up the CD, and because first of all, the biggest challenge was piracy at the time. In 2003, piracy was post Napster. There was Kazaa, there was LimeWire. There were all these, and essentially the CD itself became a device that allowed anybody to copy a full-on, 24-bit master. So people were just, it was sharing, it was file sharing. So that was the biggest challenge. And I think the wonderful creativity of companies like Apple and visionaries like Steve and his team was to build a better product and to make something so compelling that it was ease of use, it was well curated, it was technically, in the future. And of course, you had the iPod, which came out in 2002, I believe, so a year before. And the iPod was game-changing, life-changing. And so it was just one of those, visionary moments where everything came together. So between the iPod, iTunes. So the biggest challenge, and even in interviews, he was quoted as saying, the challenge is free. That's the biggest problem you have now. And because the industry didn't really embrace MP3, or companies like Napster, which in hindsight they could have, right? That could have been the next format if you think about it, because the industry has always recycled itself with formats. It started with, vinyl, and then it went to cassettes and 8-tracks and then CDs, and then you had to repurchase your catalog. And then they tried DAT and they tried other formats to get people to keep repurchasing. And the MP3, if you think about it, could have been the next format. And even when iTunes started, people insisted that it had DRM, and it was wrapped in safety and security, and people couldn't share files and things like that. So to answer your question in a long-winded answer, I think the biggest challenge was piracy.
Sure. You also mentioned the labels as well. So, they that were feeling the pain of the illegal downloads, and I guess iTunes sat in between. I remember the promo was 1,000 songs in your pocket for the iPod.
Yeah.
And it was just a revelation, really, wasn't it?
It was.
Perfect.
Change is necessary, and people sometimes, will embrace it, and eventually everybody embraced it because it was just necessary. It was time for another octave, another chapter in the history of music.
Well, another remarkable moment that you were instrumental in was the creation of AWAL, as well as Platoon. Yeah. Can I ask what were the key differences? What are the key differences between these two? Businesses, I suppose, and what were the differences in how they grew? The evolution of them.
Sure.
They're kind of at different times, aren't they?
Yeah, you said it. I was just going to say that. Yeah, right. I started AWOL in 1997, so it was, again, I just felt the need, and I became obsessed with the internet in 97. So I just snapped it all up. I just learned as much as I could. I even learned all the skills to build it myself. And I had friends, when you're a manager, you run into great talent, and then you try and get those talent record deals. And, there was an artist in mind that comes to mind. His name was Michael Ruff. He wrote a lot of hits for people. Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time album, he's all over that album. And I tried to get him a record deal because his songs were that good. And I just couldn't. He was 35 years old. And, there were all these excuses. He's too old. He's this, he's that. And I thought to myself, so I started with artists like that, artists who had their own CDs. And I really started in my garage by getting art. So I built a site and I said, look, you give me 12 CDs. I'll put them on my shelf. I'll build this website. I'll tell the world that you can purchase this CD. We'll put it in an envelope. We'll charge $10. I'll take 3 or 4. You take the rest. And when I see that there's 3 or 4 CDs left, I'll write to you and you can send me another 12. And that's how it started, literally in my garage. And it just grew as technology caught up with things. Eventually CDs turned into liquid audio files, into real audio files. We were trying to sell digital downloads. There were many years where I struggled. I couldn't make AWOL survive. I had to fund it myself, and I had to, but I luckily got into other things like sync and licensing, because I had this amazing catalog that was unencumbered by the major system. In other words, people would call me and say, Denzyl, look, I've got a TV ad running on Tuesday. I haven't been able to negotiate with a big publishing company. Do you have a song that sounds like this? And because I knew my catalog so well, I could then say, sure, let me send you 4 or 5. And they go, oh, this is awesome. Never heard of the artist, but the music works perfectly. So I suddenly had a little publishing, sync, and licensing business, which is eventually how Steve Jobs found me, because I became an expert in clearing, licensing, working with that kind of world. So AWOL then became an aggregator. And of course, iTunes was the right moment for AWOL because we had this catalog. iTunes had a digital distribution platform that was open to catalogs in being ingested into iTunes. So I already had a catalog of thousands of songs just waiting for something like iTunes to come. And, so it really helped propel the business very early on. And because my artists and my songs and the artists owned, I tried to do everything the opposite of what I knew to be true at the time that I knew from managing artists on major labels. So instead of a 394-page contract, I insisted on a 1-page contract, which took me a long time to do. And still to this day, AWOL has a 1 or 2-page contract. And instead of the artist owned everything, we never owned anything. We just took a distribution fee of 15%. And artists were free to leave. There was if an artist got signed to a major, that was like success to us. Yeah. And during our time of AWOL, there were lots of success stories from Arctic Monkeys and then artists would get off of their record deals in certain territories and they call me up and they go, look, Japan just became available. Can you just distribute for me in Japan? And I'd say, of course, you can just tick boxes when you do digital. So AWOL became a fairly large aggregator. And by the time it got sold to Cobalt, there were thousands of artists on the platform, thousands and thousands. And to this, I think now AWOL is a very big company. It's probably $100 million company. Over the 7 years, Cobalt has done a lot of investing. Platoon is not that. Platoon is a much smaller. The idea is to take a small amount of artists and put a team of experts behind those artists and give them the services and tools and services that they need in order to build successful businesses. And at Platoon, we try to innovate by getting away from this advance recoup cycle, where you give an artist in advance, they got to pay you back, all that kind of thing, by doing things like in the early days of Platoon, we paid artists weekly. So all that money I raised from investors, we used to take data science. And now in the streaming economy, if an artist does 3 million streams in their first week, that's an average of $10,000 in the streaming world at 0.0033 cents a stream, correct? So what we did is like, look, we've got the data. It's right here. It says you've done 3 million streams. We'll give you that money, 7 days, so you can go make a video, go on tour, do things like that. So we try to innovate and come up with new ideas for things. And some things work, a lot of things fail. But if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. And that's how Platoon has evolved. It's become more of a services creative company, a platform. We built a digital platform. We give data and analytics because artists, struggle. You go to Apple Music for artists to get your data from Apple. You go to Spotify for artists to get your music from Spotify. You go to Pandora for artists. So we've always been involved. I've always been involved in building data and analytics services. Even at AWOL, we had something called BuzzDeck, which allowed a manager or an artist to see their daily streams, their daily trends. And it's always been a cornerstone of things that we built, because if you know how to use that data, you can really make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, the speed of maneuverability it proved to be a massive advantage, really, for you then.
Yes, yeah. No, I think you have two ways of seeing the world, and one is as an opportunity. And of course, I have had an amazing amount of mentors through my life. Even as a manager. My little management company was absorbed into Shep Gordon's management company in 1989. And, if you haven't seen Shep Gordon's documentary, Supermensch, I had Shep as a mentor for many years. I had Paul Simon as a mentor. I've had Jack Holtzman from Elektra Records as a mentor. And, I had Steve and all the people around him and all the amazing people in the music industry, from the Austins to you just name it. And so, that's how they've all taught me that every moment is an opportunity. And if you see it that way, and if you give your artist that kind of sensibility, they can choose any moment to, write a song or sit on the couch and do nothing. That's the choices that they have. And so if you try and help artists build businesses, that became a cornerstone of Platoon is how can we help you build a successful business? Because if we can do that, then you can go on and have a career.
Were you able to, the 1-page and 2-page contract idea? Have you been able to port that into Platoon?
Definitely, most definitely. And but at Platoon, we keep evolving too, because what you realize is that artists, and Ben can attest to this, are a very unique DNA. Every artist has this special DNA. And there's no way you can do one thing for one artist, cut and paste it, and do it for the other artist. So it drives my lawyer nuts, but I've taken that 1-page contract, but we've adapted it for various tiers at Platoon. So an artist may come in, not need anything, not need a budget, they're fully self-contained, and they may have a certain kind of a deal. And then other artists may need a 10K budget because they do. And another artist may need hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars. And obviously that has a slightly different tiered approach. So I've learned over time that there's no one deal that fits every artist, and nor should there be, because every artist is at a different level, needs different things, needs different investment. And you can adjust the contract according to the investment. And if you're very artist first, which we are, we're always thinking what's best for the artist, then you should be able to negotiate, because negotiating and making money and giving money and being successful artist and being financially successful, to me, is just as creative as making the music, because it's that. And I used to teach a course called This Business of Music, that tried to prove the point that artists have a right brain, left brain issue. And what I learned from managing artists in the 80s and 90s is that they would really compartmentalize the business side to the creative side, and in fact harm themselves, because I know nothing about business. I don't want to know, and so they would surround themselves with business managers, accountants, lawyers, and they'd be paying out all this money and not know, and it wasn't until I started managing artists who I'd taken on who had history of being robbed, because this is one industry where, there is a lot of, and if you go into the history of a lot of major label artists and read about them, you'll see their accountants ran away with their money, their lawyers ran away with their money, because you can, and especially artists who are making tons of money. Oh, what's a few million they're not going to notice here and there. So I really wanted to prove this point, and especially now in this era, artists and young managers really need to cross that barrier of right brain, left brain between creativity and money and finance and legal and accounting and all that, and just try and see that as creativity, if you can.
Yeah.
Hard to do.
I actually read, some of those things you wrote, and they really struck a chord with me. I think, really wonderful insight. But I'm also a big fan of keeping the legal things as simple as they can be as well.
Well, there are things that have been particularly gray in the music industry, and if you think about it, the contract itself. If you studied the contract, and Ben, I'm sure, and other people on the call, and I'm sorry, I don't really know who's on this call, I should. If you study the contract that is currently out there, the long one, you'll see that it has history back to the 30s and 40s, and it's very well written for that period of time, or not, because a lot of artists actually were not well treated in the early days of the music history. It was they were the ones who made the least amount from their creativity, or they were paid a small amount of money and didn't own anything. So that contract has evolved, and I think there's a lot of issues in the long form contract. And the same with publishing. There's this gray area. Artists are like, what does publishing actually mean, and how do I collect, and what does neighboring rights mean? And so that's another area that we're trying to demystify these things that have been myths all along for artists. And publishing is another one. It's been a bit of a myth.
Yeah, it's revisiting everything with a fresh mind, isn't it? Really, and not being constricted by the baggage of the past, I guess.
Well, especially now. I mean, we live in a very a new era where there's with the advent of smartphones and the current technology and apps and how the phone is just changed our lives.
It seems to be a trait of your where you're sort of constantly looking at things with fresh eyes, and do you ask yourself?
My age.
Well, yeah, do you ask yourself, where can this go now? Where could we possibly take this? Moving forward, it's that sort of creative.
Well, I have the lucky seat of, I was born in the 50s, right? So I've been able to live through many cycles of things that I've been able to observe. So, there does, as other people can attest who reach a certain point, there is a bit of wisdom in having, well, you can also see it another way, because a lot of people have been quite down on the industry, but I've always been very positive that music is, it's a big part of our lives, and it always will be. And so we need to perpetuate all the good things about the industry that help artists stay alive.
And your experience enables you to anticipate, really. You just seem to be able to look around the next corner. Are you sure you don't have that time machine?
No, I do have. I do have one. Sorry, I'm just going to have to admit.
We've got a coup now. We've got. It wouldn't surprise me though, Denzyl, I have to say. Brilliant. Okay. We were sort of heading into the territory of the digital, the metadata scenario, and clearly one of the obstacles that we're encountering is the quality of data. You were kind of alluding to the fact that you seemingly had, were very well organized in terms of that prior to the iTunes scenario, and you were ready to sort of, migrate it across. But could you expand a bit on the concept of metadata and,
Sure.
What can be done to fix the issues and move that agenda forward?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated by metadata since you were able to put a CD in your computer and Grace Note would pop the titles for you, and then you could put that in, and you could make playlists, and you could So I've been fascinated. In fact, every album CD that I ever collected, I digitized and had the metadata. So I've been fascinated by metadata. And of course, with the advent of iTunes, it was all about metadata, because if you spelt one thing wrong, everything fell apart. So you had to get metadata right. And where I really learned about metadata was in classical music, because it's very complicated. And the hierarchy of classical didn't quite work for digital and all those kinds of things. We at Platoon built a platform that allows artists to upload their own metadata, so we don't have to retype anything, and it allows to catch mistakes as well. So we like pristine metadata, but if you talk to Imogen Heap and people like that, metadata is at the root of a lot of problems in the music industry, because it was, in many cases, it was tasked as a menial job by an intern who probably didn't have the passion for metadata that they should have, and so a lot of metadata you see in the publishing world, in the music industry, has just been inputted incorrectly. Plus, it was never given the attention it deserved from the onset. All the metadata, all the writers, all the producers, all the correct nuances, the genres, all that kind of thing. But I think the DSPs now have gotten much better at ingesting correct metadata. But I love what Imogen's trying to do. She's trying to make that the cornerstone, not just metadata, but like all of your data. It's like a digital wallet. It's like a digital passport, because she's saying that all your ISRC codes, all your collection numbers, it's like having a passport with everything in there, because as your music travels through the world, it's not being tracked properly. So you're not being paid properly either. And that's because of metadata. So all the collection societies, if they don't, there's millions of dollars sitting in collection societies because it's uncollected because the metadata is incorrect. Literally tens of millions of dollars sitting there, and they don't know where to, they send it, hey, we've got money for you. It's the wrong address. We've spelt your name wrong. I wrote an album in South Africa in the 70s. And, the publishing company there, keeps trying to send me money, but they still have my South African address from the 70s. And, so that's the problem. It's like metadata is always changing, but as you say, it's a big issue, and we should fix it, and it needs to be fixed. On the technology can help fix it. We've had friends go into the big collection societies and offer them ways of cleaning up and making metadata pristine. But the only thing we could do now is, anytime we deal with metadata, is make it pristine.
Yeah, well, as you say, we can kind of get it right now, can't we? But there's still that.
There's a lot of historical problems with metadata, and it's just work. It's like it's like licensing and clearing of songs. It's just work. Sometimes in my days of licensing, when I was doing work, you'd find a song and it had 15 writers and 15 different publishing companies. But, the company I was working for really wanted to license that song. And it's just work. You just have to call up every publishing company, and they don't want to hear from you too. You get this, sorry, we'll get back to you in 6 weeks. Well, that doesn't work. So it's just, unfortunately, it's just a lot of work to clean all this up. But it's necessary. It's that, for many years, 2-3 years ago, people were thinking blockchain, crypto, all that might help solve these metadata issues, right? Because but that hasn't materialized either.
Do you think we've moved on from that now?
I think there's the promise of it sounds good, but the proof is in the proverbial pudding, as they say, and no one has really cracked it. So if they did, then we'd be using it. May the best software win, so to speak.
Yeah. Very interesting. But of course, part of the problem is there's different copyrights involved, isn't there? And that needs to be accurately recorded in the metadata, doesn't it?
Yeah, different copyrights, and then there's different licenses for different territories. So, a song or an artist may be signed to one label in the US, but a whole set of different labels in the UK, and a whole set of different labels in Australia or Japan, or, and then there's, the labels change or get sold, and then things move around. And so that data has just kind of gotten corrupted over time.
Yeah. And of course, for a lot of the time, things were done on paper. Of course, digital is a whole brave world, isn't it, really, where things can move forward, really, I guess.
Yeah.
On to the question, the big question, what do you think is the future of digital distribution?
Well, it's all, everything is currently digital anyway. Yes and no, there's also physical distribution, and that will continue for as long as it continues. Things are having a resurgence. We deal with things like merchandise, physical goods, vinyl. We love doing vinyl, and fans will always determine how the industry goes. But the future is super bright. If you think of the proliferation of digital distribution companies, And if you look at the success of certain aggregators out there, Ditto, DistroKid, TuneCore, they've all built big businesses in digital distribution. And, the barrier to entry is nil. You could literally record a song on your iPhone and release it. And if it doesn't hit any snags, with the filters, you could be up on, any one of 293 digital distribution receptacles around the world. And you could even have a hit because audiences can find you, and you could use some of these social media platforms like TikTok, Triller, Snapchat, and people can find you. So, the key to digital distribution is that it's making it so much easier for fans to find artists and for artists to find fans. And that's always been at the heart of the music industry. But the key is that fans are, they won't be lied to. It's like, in my estimation, you've just got to be fucking good these days to cut through, right? You just got to be really magical, and you got to have great music, great talent, great presence. You got to work really, really hard. And then, all that. And if you've got a great team, or even if you don't have a great team, there's plenty of stories of artists who make something in their bedroom, put it out, and it takes off. So the future of digital distribution is bright because it's now a one-to-many situation.
It's incredibly democratizing, isn't it?
It's complete freedom.
Yeah.
And all the young geeks out there who understand ones and zeros and coding really understand that. I had the lucky experience of at AWOL we hired a young CTO named Mark Thomas. I think he was 21 or 22. He's an amazing trumpet player. And one night he came to me, and this is 2005. So I think it was just iTunes in those days. There was there was nobody else. And he said, Denzyl, look at this. iTunes gives you those incredible data. They can tell you which song has been downloaded better than other, what country these songs are in. And look, I built you a little dashboard, and you can see the song is, and then I've built it up so if the artist does like a BBC interview, we can go every day and see how the song's growing. I'm like, Mark, that's incredible. And he said, yeah, and I can do it on this level and this level. And he says to me, I said, well, can you add MySpace? Because MySpace at the time was, he says to me, I'd like to add MySpace data. Can you get me an API? Call your friend Courtney Holt, who was running MySpace. And I'm like, Mark, what's an API? So, we rely on these brilliant people who don't take no for an answer and see the world in a whole different way. And I've always been very lucky to surround. I mean, the average age of my platoon team is 24. Take me out of the equation. And we're 20 something people now. And it's wonderful to work in this business now where people are, coming up with new ideas all the time. And it's all about this one-to-many concept. It's like, I've come up with this idea, and, we could reach, like one of our artists on Platoon said, I'd like to have a signing party. I'm like, well, we've never really done that. Yeah, let's do it on Zoom. So we have a signing party where she said, I've signed to Platoon. We've never really done that, right? She puts it up on her Instagram, tags us. We get like 8,000, and then 1,000 people suddenly became fans of Platoon's Instagram just from that one moment. In that 1 second, 1,000 new people from that one post. So that the world works in mysterious ways. And so that's the world of digital.
Yes, it's a very exciting world. Platoon, just sounds such an exciting place to be at the moment. So much energy around it and vision. With the increasing popularity in label services and label plus deals, do you think that distributors are becoming the new major labels?
Well, I don't think that's accurate, because I really don't think I think the independent sector is growing. Mm-hmm. And if you put independent distributors in there, so that independent sector is like the new distributors that are all popping up around the world, and then also the major indies, the Dominoes and the 4ADs and all those wonderful companies that have always been super independent.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the growing sector, and you can see it if you read a lot and you read the data. I think major labels it's hard to become the new major label. Mm-hmm. It's an impossible thing, I think. I think there are indies doing incredibly well, and I think there are indies offering major label type services on top of distribution deals, which even AWOL got into, AWOL label services and all those kinds of things. And that makes complete sense, because artists want independence, but they need services. Yeah. And they need the services that major labels are so good at. They have worldwide offices, they have people, they have creative teams, they have money, right? So a lot of new distributors are becoming more like a major label because they're offering advances and they're offering services and they have in-house publishing and all the things that major labels have. They just don't have the same contracts that majors have. Now, majors can have had over time this ability to grow some artists into massive talent, massive successes. I mean, kabillions of now streams, right, or sales in the old days. And that's always been their brilliance, is that they've been able to take somebody from here to here. Even, if you look at Billie, who started with us when she was 14 and then moved on to Darkroom through Interscope, and now is one of the biggest artists in the world. And having known and having been her friend and knowing her management, you can see how that, how that has transpired, and there's, could that have happened with us? Definitely not in 2016. We weren't ready for it, So, and our contract was again, a one-page agreement, which we were just her distributor. But we were able to at least get her in the door with a one-page overnight agreement where she was still writing songs and she needed a place to incubate without people telling her what to do. There was no pressure. So did we provide that good, wonderful foundation for her for 8 months to a year? Absolutely. Did we help in her career? Absolutely. So there's, I just don't see how. I think the independent sector as a whole is huge, but any labels, they are acting more like majors, and Ben can tell you, Believe is kind of acting like a major. They offer money, they offer services, they offer long-term agreements, they can give you all these things. However, it's very difficult because artists need teams, and they need, again, they got this unique DNA, and it's very difficult to sign 125 acts a year to your label and then give everybody the attention they deserve. Only a few of those acts are going to slip through the cracks and make it, and the rest, unfortunately, are stuck in a long-term agreement. And if in the old days, if your single didn't hit at radio, maybe you got the shot at a second single. And if the A&R guy who signed you, could make a case for you, maybe you got the shot at a third single. But if you didn't hit it radio on your third, you were toast. Maybe you hadn't even put out an album yet. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, we gave it a shot at radio. It didn't really work because radio was the driver in those days. Now radio is not really the driver anymore. It still helps, but it's not the driver. The driver is streams, social media followings, the ability to tour and sell tickets and sell merchandise, sync, licensing, publishing, etc.
All of those things in dialogue with each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you see the growth of certain artists, you can just see all those things come together. But at the heart of it all is the song.
Yeah.
So again, unless you connect with your fans with songs and lyrics and melodies, it's that's the magic trick. I mean, we've had so many companies come to us and say, we've got the software which can predict hits, and we've taken them on just to check, And it's interesting because all the AI now is so sophisticated, and all the algorithms and things, and there's a lot you can glean and learn from. And I, me, I love technology, but we have our ears, and we've had a lovely string of successes, from on the A&R side, and it's just when you hear something, it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, and then so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you were sort of talking about radio, and there's the idea, the notion of playlists, and getting on playlists. Which is there's a lot of play on getting on Spotify playlists and other platforms. What are your thoughts on getting having success in that area and the impact that it can have?
Oh, it's incredible how powerful playlists are. I mean, we had an artist for a while in the early days of Platoon, and her name was Fen Lily, and she had a song called, I think it was called Tip to Toe or something like that. It was just an acoustic song, and somehow we got her. It wasn't even she just got placed in the acoustic afternoon chill playlist. Literally was doing 1 million streams a week from that playlist.
Yeah,
a week, 1 million streams a week. For months and months and months. And then you realize the power of playlists. So yes, it's obviously super beneficial to get on playlists. How you get on playlists? Well, that's why I like our Platoon model, because we only have a few artists. So we can walk into Spotify, or invite them to our listening room and play them 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 songs. And those songs are all like, one's better than the other, in my opinion. Whereas some companies who have 30 songs or 50 songs or 100 songs, or if you're on in the TuneCore model, you just put your music in and you hope that it goes. And there's no magic sauce, somebody's just got to hear it, because we live in editorial, kind of scenario. So somewhere on Apple Music, the editors have to hear it, and they've set themselves up so that every company has a label rep. Right? So Spotify, Apple, Deezer, Tidal, Amazon, YouTube, they all have reps. And when you're an established company, you build, in my opinion, you have to build relationships. So to me, I've spent my whole life building relationships. So I'm able to call somebody or have a meeting and say, we have an amazing song. And they go, great, let me hear it.
Yeah.
And that's the key for us. Now, when you build a big shop with thousands and thousands of artists, that becomes difficult. Then you've got to hierarchize and you've got to prioritize and go, well, I'm just going to focus on these top 5 artists. And if you're signed to a distributor or an aggregator and you're not in that top 5, then you've got to fend for yourself. Then you just got to hope that on Spotify, your fans pick it up so that the algorithms can kick in, because what the lovely thing about a company like Spotify is that, their algorithms are so sophisticated. In fact, all the companies have pretty sophisticated algorithms, so that if a song starts doing well, it'll just get picked up by certain playlists. So how do you get your song to do well in those 1 to 2 to 3 in the first few weeks of release? And we are very first week driven, because you want the New Music Friday, you want the New Music Daily on Apple, you want to be the new artist of the week on this, and you want that. But again, you have to be so desirable now in the industry that people need to want to promote you and feature you and editorialize you.
There's a lot of competition for those playlist positions, isn't there? Obviously there's a lot of paywalls and organic and
there's a lot of competitions, and of course the majors all have many releases too. I mean, in some weeks, between Sony, Warner, Universal, and others, there might be hundreds of releases. And I mean, the figures floating around about how many songs are being submitted a week into Spotify and the DSPs. It's a lot of songs, a lot of music out. So there's a blessing and a curse to the time we live in. There's a lot of music out. Barrier to entry is easy. Anybody can make a song on the computer and upload it. So how do you stay in the top?
I mean, it's quite easy to see, what you're doing. It's when there's so much other stuff out there, you're very focused with Platoon, aren't you?
Oh, 100% focused. But I'm also focused on the A&R and on studios. You know, I've built. We have 10,000 square feet of creative studio space in London, which I've always had. I've always been very studio focused.
Right.
I love the studio environment. I love being in the studio. I love, putting artists in there, and we give our studios freely to our artists. And then in Africa, we have studios in Cape Town and Johannesburg and Lagos and Accra and Dar es Salaam and Nairobi as well. So I love the whole studio process because that's where it all happens. So I'm focused on Platoon. I'm focused on music. We're focused on helping artists. You know, we've been doing these Platoon masterclasses since COVID, since lockdown, almost every week. As I mentioned before, we did a Triller masterclass. We did a Snapchat last. We got a TikTok one coming up on Thursday. We've been having songwriter workshops. We had our artist Pooh Bear, who writes with Justin Bieber, do a songwriter interviewed by Merck Mercuriadis. We've been building artist kits that we send to artists. We've got this great kit, comes in an envelope case. It's got a ring light, a Shure microphone, a stand, and a place for your iPhone in the middle of the ring light. To be able to, and a Streamcaster made by Roland. So it allows an artist to perform from home, sound good, look good, and be able to stream live. So we've been building those kits for artists, trying to make sense of, how artists can make a living during this time.
Was that since COVID? Was that a response to COVID?
Yeah. Early. Luckily, we started early with that. So, so you have to, that's part of the charm of being in this industry that we are. You need to be flexible and think on your toes. And once you're, I was a tour manager for many years and a manager, and that's the one job that you get to think on your toes, and anything could happen at any time. So, so I've been schooled properly.
So you're developing talent through processes like that, and your relationships with the next generations, the next waves, aren't you? With
yes. It's just fantastic, and we don't solicit. There's very little on Platoon or me actually on the web. On the web, I haven't done that much. There was a Billboard article recently on our work in Africa, but I've pretty much said no to because it's just not our style, and we never wanted to do a website that was an about us page. I just stayed away from that. So all of the music that comes to us is all word of mouth, either other artists that are recommending it, or managers or people who know what we do or what we like. So the quality and the level, I think, is stellar. So yeah, and we're having a good moment at this time with young Holly Humberstone. If you check her out, she's got 3 singles in. Her latest single's called Over. She's lovely. She's 19 years old. And we have Victoria Monet, who is the co-writer for Ariana Grande. We've really committed to working with her. She's been on every label possible, and found us out. We signed Princess Nokia, the rapper from New York, who put out 2 records in one day, and we've made it happen. And she's had a viral TikTok hit, and we've and then we've got 88 artists in Africa that we work with. So but yeah, that's our focus, is just to help those artists do really well.
How important I'm thinking of the relationship between, I suppose, output, the digital favoring frequent, a lot of output for artists. It's very hard to make brilliant, amazing music and lots of it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on the artist. The artists go through cycles, but that's the magic of the artists of today. They have something to say, and they're coming up with new melodies. And I mean, even when we had Pooh Bear on our workshop, people were saying, how do you constantly come up with new melodies for Justin Bieber? I mean, and he said how he does it. He never wants to, when he comes up with a melody, is it good enough? How can I do it better? And if you look at Justin Bieber, he's written all those songs. So
Denzyl, can I just say, whilst I'm not a young chap necessarily, I do like to get inspired, and I feel you're such an inspiring character, and I'd like to. It's been a wonderful experience talking with you, and thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I hope everybody found it fruitful and helpful, and yeah, what an incredible time we're in. Both the comedy,
Absolutely,
and not. So yeah. All right, I will sign up and say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Denzyl. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody else.
Bye-bye.
Bye.